Bibles, if you would, over to Genesis 43. Genesis 43 here this morning. The message theme for this morning is control freak. So I ran across this passage, it was a few weeks ago actually. I've been working it through and just kind of thinking about it and trying to prepare a message off of it. And the message this morning is not going to be as outline-oriented as it is just really this one simple truth. There's going to be one simple truth that we learn. There are a lot of different ways in which we kind of go about it. There's going to be a lot of introduction and other things. But control freak. I want to ask you a question this morning. Would you consider, don't raise your hand, you don't have to tell somebody, don't nudge your spouse, would you consider yourself a control freak? Would you consider yourself a control freak? Now, in saying that, you say, well, what is a control freak? Well, here you go. A person whose behavior indicates a powerful need to control people or circumstances in everyday life. Okay. People that feel like they have to control the circumstances of everyday life. They control people around them. They control situations. And, of course, all of us, we want to think, no, that's not me. But here's a physical picture, is a visible picture of a control freak. As the daughter asks, what is a control freak? And here the dad is very lovingly trying to figure out, making sure every single rose is planted right to the right height and all these different things. Maybe you find yourself in a situation like this. Maybe you don't. Maybe as we go through this, the Holy Spirit will tell you that you are a control freak and you need to get that right. I don't know. Hopefully, as we work through the truths here, God will obviously use His word in our hearts here this morning. And really, we're going to be looking at the story of Jacob. And kind of taking an opportunity to just kind of work through that particular story and really his lifetime. Because I guess I would say if there was a biblical picture of a control freak, I think Jacob would be pretty close to that biblical picture. And I'm going to try and build that case for us a little bit and show us what that kind of looks like. And really, as I went through this, I kind of had to say to myself, I think all of us really, humanly speaking, we're all control freaks. We all try to control things around us more than we would ever realize. I think it's just human nature in some respects. But I want to say simply this, as we read our passage, we're going to have a few different things to say as well, but a reminder that God wants us to give Him control early and often, because He has some wonderful blessings for us. We're going to get to that in just a second here. And let's read our passage here. Genesis 45, verses 11 to 14. I think, 43, verses 11 to 14, the passage that's up there, whatever it is. It says, and their father Israel said unto them, if it must be so now, do this. Take of the best fruits in the land in your vessels, carry it down the man of present. He's talking about going back down to Joseph. A little balm, of course they didn't know it was Joseph. A little honey, the spices, myrrh, and all these other things, the nuts and almonds. Take double money in your hand, the money that was brought again in the mouth of your sacks, carry it again in your hand. Peradventure it was an oversight. Take also your brother, and arise, go unto the man. And here in verse 14, Jacob says this. Jacob says, and God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that He may send away your other brother, Simeon, that was still there, and Benjamin. If I be bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. I want to submit to you this morning that Jacob, at 130 years old, was struggling giving God control. He was still struggling with something that really throughout his entire life he was struggling with, which is just simply this, giving God control. It's easy to talk about that this morning, and hopefully it will be easy to kind of understand what we're dealing with here. But as we talk about giving God control, I think all of us have to recognize we want to control things ourselves because it's a whole lot easier. When we're in control, we get to dictate the timing and the events and all this stuff. But when God's in control, we're at His mercy. Right? Really, what ultimately, I was talking to some different people about this last week. In fact, I went to visit Carol and Rick in the hospital. Rick was there. Carol was when I went to visit, but in the hospital. And And we were discussing through this, and I had mentioned just briefly what I was going to share on Sunday, kind of somewhat because I wasn't sure if they'd even be here or not. And because of everything obviously going on with them, I understand that. But we were discussing a little bit, and they were talking about how yeah, it's kind of funny. We think we're in control of so much, and then as you go through life, you realize I'm not in control of that, and I'm not in control of that, and I'm not in control, and really I'm not in control of that, and I'm also not in control of that. Like the entirety of your life, as you progress through your life, you grow in the understanding that I'm less in control than I ever thought I was. Of the circumstances of life, of the situations of life, of the people that I come into contact with, and how they affect my life, of everything. I'm in less control than I thought I ever really was. Well, that's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing if you can see it in a Christian perspective, with the fact that God is ultimately the one in control. And what actually ends up happening with this is, and it's actually really sad to see, and I'm going to kind of give you the spoiler. This is a spoiler because this is kind of where we're getting to eventually, is here Jacob has taken control, and he doesn't want Benjamin to go back. And so he waits the last possible second to send Benjamin back with the brothers. They're literally running out of food. They just came back from Egypt. They tell their father, hey, we got to go back down. We're going to take Benjamin so we can get Simeon back. Because of the way in which they worked some different things there. And the father's like, no, I'm not going to lose Benjamin too. I lost Joseph. I'm not going to lose Benjamin. He's trying to control. And the sad thing about this is he waits so long until their food runs out, until literally they can't continue to survive, to send Benjamin back down. And the sad part about it is we get to see the whole story, which is because Benjamin goes back down, he's reunited with the son that he lost, Joseph. But think about the time period that he wasted because he was in control of his life rather than allowing God to have control. He wasted opportunity to be able to get to know Joseph better because he was holding on to his own life. And when I look at this principle and I go a little bit deeper, and I understand, I'm kind of like, I like to look on levels of things. And for this in particular, I think the fact that we have to be in control of our lives, or think we have to be, is actually, it manifests a lack of trust in God. When we think we have to control our lives, and we take control away from God, we're actually ultimately saying, I don't trust God. I don't trust God. Because I think I can do a better job managing my life than God can. That's what we're ultimately saying. And I realize you say, well, I wouldn't say it like, I wouldn't put it in that light. I'm not going to say it quite like, really, isn't that what it is? And here Jacob is taking control, and because of that, he misses out on some blessings. He does eventually get to meet Joseph, excuse me. If I say Moses this morning, it's Joseph. But he does get to eventually meet the son that he lost so many years prior to this. But had he given God control faster, he would have been able to do it sooner. So here Jacob is taking control of his life. When we were in Ohio getting the LASIK surgery that we've gone out to get done out there, and I'm so grateful to have to have that done and behind me, and there's still progression in the prescription that's supposed to take place. But when I was out there, I went kind of all psyched up with the fact of LASIK. I'm looking at these things online. I'm trying to keep my eyes open for this YouTube video as I look at the procedure of LASIK. If you ever go on, you can go on YouTube and you can look at the LASIK procedure. I have troubles with the blow machine. When you go and get your prescription done, and they do that puff machine. They say the word puff, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, really? We're gonna be here 30 minutes as I try to keep my eye open for this puff machine. I know it's coming, and so you can tape it open if you want, but I just know it's coming, and so it's I try to beat it. I try to beat that puff, close that thing. Usually I win about half the time, and then eventually, finally, they get it. But when I went down there, they didn't do the puff machine. Actually, I was expecting that, so that was kind of a blessing in disguise. But going through the process the doctor, so I'm all psyched up for LASIK. I'm like, figured it out. I'm like, okay, it's, I'm sure it's going to be this, whatever. I know it's coming. So in some respects, I've controlled my own emotions to know what to expect. And the doctor throws me for a loop because right at the end of the appointment, he says, you know what? I think you're actually going to be a better candidate for PRK than for LASIK. I was like, well, what's PRK? I came here for LASIK. So what is PRK? Like, what is that? I didn't ask him that, but you can probably tell on my face. I don't know if he saw right on my face or not. Like, what? What are you talking about? And I just felt like, and Katie knows this. Katie's not up here. She'd be laughing, I'm sure, because we went back to the place after the exam, and my mind's spinning, trying to figure out the PRK. What is that? I'm looking it up. I'm doing all these kind of things, and we get back, and I was just struggling with the fact that it's different than what I was expecting. I was struggling with the fact that I'm not in control anymore. I knew what was going to happen before. I knew what to expect. I prepared myself mentally for all of this stuff, and now it's changed. And I don't like that change. You understand what I'm saying? You ever go through life and it happens to you? You're prepared. And don't get me wrong, this message is not to say we should not be prepared, we should not plan ahead, I'm not trying to say that with all this, because sometimes I think we can walk away with that perspective and say, well, good, I'm gonna shoot the breeze with life because, Proverbs 21:31 says this, the horse is prepared for the day of battle, but safety is of war. We ought to prepare like life depends upon us, and we ought to trust God like life depends upon Him, because guess what? Both are true. Okay? So I understand that's a little bit of a conundrum, as it were. So I'm not advocating here being irresponsible. I'm not advocating saying let's just kind of go through life with just shooting the breeze, and I'm not going to really plan ahead or think ahead about anything because it's all going to change anyway. Who cares? Okay, we shouldn't have that kind of attitude. But understand this, that God sometimes does change things. And I think that change helps us because it really tells us ultimately where our trust is. Our trust wasn't in God. It was in our process and our ability to control that process. Right? I can do this. But now when it's taken out of your hand, you're like, I can't do that. I can do this. Can we meet in the middle? I can do this middle thing, but I can't do that. And so for me, I went back and I was looking up PRK and all this kind of stuff, and I'm watching YouTube videos all over again. I'm going through this thing all over again, and PRK, what is this? And one of the things the doctor said was, he said, I'm going to take a brush and brush off, how do you put it, the skin basically of your eye. And I was like, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for that one. I didn't sign up for that. I signed up for the laser one that just does it really quick and it's over in a second. I signed up for that one. I didn't sign up for this one. So I was all struggling with this, and I remember even waking up early the next morning, super early the next morning, and just couldn't sleep. I had to wake up, and I read through the entire packet again. I'm trying to wrap my mind around this thing, okay? Figured this thing out. And I remember I finally came again to this place where God is continuing to teach me this truth of, are you going to trust me? Or are you going to be in control of your own life? Which is true. And I feel like Jacob, while he wasn't going through LASIK and PRK, is facing a lot of the same issues, and probably, honestly, a lot worse, because he's talking about losing a child. He's like, and child, but all of his children. All of his children. He says, look, if God takes him, God takes him. That's in his hand. He wasn't being negligent. If you look at the verses prior, he prepared and did all sorts of stuff. But at the end of the day, his trust was not in his preparation, his trust was in God. And that's what we have to do. So here, I want to just give us a simple thought as you go through this. I'm going to try to build this through here, because we'll take an opportunity to talk about Jacob's life and to look at how he was a control freak throughout his life and how God was working with him. We need to give God back control back to God, early and often, to experience all the blessings that God has in store for us. I want to submit that thought to you here this morning. That really, a lot of the things taking place in our life is God ultimately showing us who's in control of your life. Are you in control, or am I in control? And beyond that, God actually has wonderful blessings in store for those that love Him. In Romans 8:28, when it says that God works all things together for good, it's to those that love Him, to those who are called according to His purpose. And so God works these things together for good for these individuals. But, I think there are some people, and me at times, all of us at times, that resist what God does, right? God tries to take control of your life and to do something, and you're like, no, I'm not comfortable with that right now. I don't really want to go down that path, and, we try to take that control back from God. And really, it betrays or it shows our issue with trusting God as a whole anyway. But God has some blessings in store. So let's look through Jacob's life, and I'll give a moment here to give you an opportunity. What are some times in which Jacob tried to control his own life? Maybe you know the story of Jacob. Maybe you're familiar with it. You probably didn't necessarily read it in advance of our time here this morning. But in Jacob's life, can you think of times in his life that he tried to control his own life, his own destiny, as it were? Anybody think of some of those stories?
Sold his brother the pottage.
Okay. Yeah, sold his brother the pottage for the, at that point it was the birthright. There was two different portions. The older child got the birthright and the blessing. And at that point he was trying to get the birthright from Esau. And he sold it to him for, he said, no, I'm not going to give it to you unless you give me the birthright. And back and forth. So he's trying to control, he's trying to manipulate to get this. Jacob means deceiver and trickster. So he's trying to figure that out. Okay, good. That's a good one. Control.
When he met up with Esau again.
Okay. Which is,
family in front.
yeah, it kind of put everybody in different bands, just in case, like, hey, if I lose these people over here, that's not as bad as if I lose these people, and I got this band here. He's trying to organize all this stuff. But then he also, in that particular instance, he wrestles with God. And I think that was the initial him giving control to God. I'm not saying there weren't other times, there probably were other times in his life, but I think that was a big one for him where he gave control back to God. And he finally said, man, it's yours, God. If you're going to allow us to die, well, that's on your hands. But this is what he told me. And of course, God changed his name to Israel, Prince with God. So there was a name change there, I believe, in conjunction with what he was learning and what God was teaching him in his life. Okay? Good. That's a good one. Any other places in which Jacob was trying to manipulate or control his own life? Honestly, I feel like his entire life, from beginning to end, it actually is really sad. But the sad part about this is it's easy to criticize him, but it's to also look in our own lives and see, like, that stream that sometimes turns into a river and a raging, river is in my own life too. It's not just in Jacob's life. So here's a few different ones. How about when he tricks Esau out of the birthright? We already went through this one, and so I will go past this. See, look, if you answer questions, we go faster through the sermon, so I'm just putting that out there for future reference. He tricks Esau out of the birthright, so that one was there. And then, here's the pottage, give me this, and he left. Okay, and then the next one, I have a couple in between here. He tricks his father to give him the blessing. I look at this story and I wonder very much what all was going on there. I know that his mother had received from God the idea that Jacob would be the one that's blessed and is one that's chosen of God. I almost, and forgive me for trying to interact and even just trying to figure this out, is I wonder if Jacob had maybe slipped his mom some thoughts about what to do and then responded to what she said, versus just doing it himself. So this trickster thing, and whether they're all in cahoots about that, he's trying to trick his father out of the blessing, and he does that as well. He puts some different things on. He controls the situation. Him and his mom control the situation. Later on, he leaves so Esau doesn't kill him, because Esau wants to kill him, and so he leaves. He goes to Laban. While he's at Laban, he works for two different wives. So here he's controlling the situation yet again. He's like, I'm going to work for, this wife, and you gave me the wrong one, you tricked me, so I'm going to work for this one. And then after that, he says, I'm going to work for wages. And do you know how many times Laban changed his wages? Laban changed his wages 10 times. And every time he would put some different things in the water. When the strong cattle would go, or when the strong sheep and the strong ones would go to the water, he would put special things in the water so that they would produce whatever he was supposed to get. Like his entire life there was just, I'm controlling this situation. I mean, it's kind of a mixture, because I know he recognizes that God is blessing him, but clearly he's trying to manipulate and control it too. So there's a back and forth, and there's a mixture, obviously, with that. Then he leaves Laban without letting him know, and he just leaves. He's gone. He then pleads with God before Esau is approaching. Maybe had mentioned that one as well. And there's some different verses here about that. I'm going to go through some of them. And then Jacob controls his response as well when the boys come back from the Egyptian to be able to get food there. In Genesis 47, let me turn to this one. I'm trying to remember where I put it in this slide here. But in Genesis 47, in verses 33 to 35, it says this. I'll read it for us. Get the right passage. 47. I got the wrong one. Oh, okay. Genesis 37, excuse me. Verses 33 to 35. It says, and he knew it and said, "It is my son's coat." So this is when his brothers had basically, quote unquote, killed Joseph, put blood on his coat, and brought it back to the dad. So the dad sees the coat and says, "It's my son's coat." It says, "An evil beast has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces." And Jacob rent his clothes, put sackcloth on his loins, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, and he said, "For I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Here in verse 35, he actually controls his emotional state based on his loss of Joseph. It says, he actually makes a decision. I'm going to go down into the grave mourning for my son. Don't bother me. This is what I'm going to do. He's controlling yet again in that circumstance as well. And then Jacob controls when his sons return. In Genesis 42, verses 29 through 34, and then verse 38 is the key verse I'm going to read for that one. Verse 38 of Genesis 42 says, "And he said, My son shall not go down with you. For his brother is dead, Joseph's dead, and he is left alone. If mischief befall him by the way, in the way which he should go, then shall ye bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave." A little bit later on here, and I've gone a number of verses past some of this, Jacob is controlling the whole situation with Benjamin and says, Benjamin is not going down to Egypt. Kind of puts his foot on the ground and just says, that's it. I'm going to control this situation. And I know your brother is down there, and he's kind of in a bad way, as it were, but you know what? I'm going to control this situation. I'm not going to let this occur or let this happen. So I'm trying to flip through some of these verses here as well. So he's continually controlling the situation from start to finish. We finally get to our passage where, again, he's controlling. In verse 14, he finally has to give up control yet again. Get there eventually. Anyway, well, I'll leave that alone. Okay, we're going to continue to work through that. I don't know what happened. But he's continuing to control the situation time and time again. In Genesis 43, he again has to give that control back to God. And let me ask you this question, as we talk about this idea of control that Jacob obviously had, and he continues throughout his life, and I feel like he gets to this point where he's 130 years old. 90% of his life has gone by. And I feel like he's still learning the same lesson over again. You ever feel like you've gone through that? You're like, I learned this lesson before. God taught me this lesson. I remember when I learned that lesson. But sometimes God has to continue to teach us some of those lessons as well, as we continue to work through some different things. But to remind each one of us that we need to give control back to God early and often to experience all the blessing that God has in store for us. as spouses, as a spouse, do you try to control your spouse? Sometimes there's myriads of ways that this can occur, this can happen. Guilt, fear, blame. Try to control and manipulate your spouse. For men, I'll give you this test, men. If you want to find out. Allow your wife to drive, sit in the passenger seat, and say nothing.
Yeah, right.
Right? Our sentiments exactly right. I find this not to be true. Katie she does have to drive occasionally for car sickness, and she actually had to drive the whole way out there and the whole way back. You know, with some of the different things with the eyes. You know, I couldn't technically drive while everything was healing and stuff. And so she's driving, and I found myself saying a lot of stuff. You know, like I would do this differently. Forgive me. Katie would tell you if she was here. Okay, she's not, so you don't have to go tell her I told you. I told her myself. But simply this is sitting in that passenger seat, not being in control of the wheel. I found, you know what? I'm in more control, or I want to take control being in this seat. You understand what I'm saying? So maybe it's for spouses, maybe you try to control or manipulate your spouse. And you know, sometimes I think God does give us a perspective. God puts together two individuals that have strengths and weaknesses, and oftentimes an individual who can see the strengths or weaknesses of the other wants to help them, right? Quote unquote. You want to help this person. I'm trying to make them more like Christ, and I'm going to do that by ripping apart all these different things until finally they can get, you know, I'm going to perfect you. I don't know what in our minds gives us this thought that we're going to perfect our spouse. But it's there. And it's there in me, and I can only imagine that it's also there for some of you too. Maybe some of you right now are ribbing your spouse. You know, see, I told you. All this morning, all the way to church, I was telling you the same thing. Look, he's telling you the same thing. Okay, you understand what I'm saying? So maybe there is that manipulation, that trying to perfect your spouse. And there are times at which you have to have candid conversations. But can I say this is, are you trying to manipulate and control the situation, or are you giving control to God and responding to what He's telling you to do? Ultimately, the question is God in the driver's seat of this thing, or are you in the driver's seat? Because those two may look very similar and almost exactly the same, but they will have different outcomes. They're going to have completely different outcomes. The fruit of the Spirit is one thing, and the fruit of the flesh is something entirely different. Now, I will say this, you can control and manipulate and do different things and get a response for a short amount of time. It's easy to use emotional stress and just all sorts of things to get a response that you want just for a short amount of time. That usually can take place. But the real test is in the long run. What does that look like? What is that tree bearing? What kind of fruit is that tree bearing in years down the road? A year down the road. 2 years down the road. 3 years down the road. Can I tell you this? The tree that God plants is going to bear good fruit. It's going to bear good fruit. But the tree that we plant in our own strength will absolutely not bear good fruit. Okay? Whatever the opposite of good fruit is. Horrible fruit. It's going to be decaying, disgusting fruit that comes off of that tree. And can I tell you this, and I'm going to tell you this carefully, is that's one way to know how you've been planting. God always produces something good. We, only ourselves, always produce something bad. Don't at the end of that road go, well, this is bad fruit. Look, I did what you said, God. Because the bad fruit is telling you, you didn't do what He said. You did something else. Maybe you did, quote unquote, all the right things, but you were trusting yourself the entire way. So whether it's spouses controlling each other, trying to manipulate and figure things out, and trying to conform her or him to the image of Christ. I see this thing that's lacking, I want to fix it. Okay? That happens. Shouldn't. You should pray for that individual. Now don't tell Katie this, maybe she'll watch this. This isn't that. If I see something in Katie's life that I don't think is right, you know what the first thing that the Word has taught me this, because I've not always done this. Well, Lord has taught me this. You know, the first thing that I try to do is I try to pray for her God. I try to pray that God would work in her heart. If there truly is something that's lacking, that's where I start. You know why I start there? And I don't just start there because I'm like, oh, well, I'm trying to do it God's way, so I'm going to start there. I start there because I can't fix the thing. It's actually just an act of desperation. I want to say faith, but I think desperation is closer to the truth. And I'm not saying by saying that, please don't misunderstand me this morning, that Katie has all these horrible flaws. Okay, I'm not trying to say that. Somebody's going to go tell her, you have a lot of flaws. Okay, Pastor Adam said you have all these flaws. Okay, don't do that. Okay, that's not going to help. But I'm trying to use that as an illustration to simply say this is starting in that mindset is incredibly important. And it's a trust thing. Ultimately, it's can I fix that or can God fix that? God may use me in the process of fixing it. Okay? God may have me say something in a loving way at some point. But can I tell you that's not right away usually. Usually, that's not quite right away. Because if I was going to say something, do something right away, that's me. That's not really God. 9 times out of 10. Okay, so the spouse aspect, we understand that. How about this? I'll meddle a little bit more with this control idea. How about parents with kids? Now, I understand God's word says train up your children in the way they should go. Okay, I'm not advocating for this idea of just like, well, you just kind of let your kids do whatever, and that's, praise God, they're going to turn out. Okay, I'm not advocating for that, but I think we can go too far the other direction where we try to box them in so much, we're controlling them. And really the issue is not really what you do, it's who are you trusting by doing that. Am I trusting me to produce good kids? Well, good luck going down that route. Or out of desperation, am I trusting God and this is what God wants me to do? So the hard thing about this is some of these routes may look exactly the same, but the issue is this: who are you trusting? Are you trusting yourself or are you trusting God? Parents with kids. What about vice versa? Kids with parents. Trying to control and manipulate parents. So that's the other way. I realize some of them may not be in here. What about coworkers or a job situation? Maybe you have a boss who's very controlling, or maybe you are the boss and you're very controlling. Maybe there's a certain employee that gets on your nerves. And so you use certain tactics to control that person. Control. I think Jacob had to recognize that he had to give control back to God. That didn't mean he didn't plan, he wasn't responsible. There was a lot of other things that, yes, are important to do. But ultimately, who are you trusting? When you do what you do, who are you trusting? When you say what you say, when you try to raise kids, who are you ultimately trusting? Say, well, if I just do X, Y, and Z, then they will turn out. If you're trusting God, Kate and I have had many of these conversations. We continue to work through this with kids. We're like, our kids, I'm sure, will not be perfect. We're going into adoption, and we're excited about this and everything. And talk about not having control, too, with adoption. And somebody else is in control of all the different things that take place all the time. And there's definitely some frustration of that. Some people can definitely associate that. But not just that, but recognizing that, here we're going to have this child, and undoubtedly they're not going to be a perfect child. Kate and I have had these conversations, and we said, but church will expect them to be a perfect child. I said, well, church is going to have to get used to the fact that we're imperfect, and so are our children. They're going to have to understand this. And obviously we want them to be godly. Yes. But perfect? Well, perfect takes time, right? Godly, yes. Perfect takes time. But that aspect of control, yet again. We control in so many different ways, and we try to manipulate and do different things. But I'm glad that God was patient with Jacob, teaching him this lesson continually to recognize this aspect of control. So coming back to the PRK. So here I am, just thinking about and researching this PRK, trying to figure it all out, and finally, I feel like I came to some sort of sense of peace, yes, because of some of the things I studied, but more so importantly was this, and I went back to looking at this verse and reminding myself about this verse, and really even as I was going through the procedure, quoting this verse to myself. God Almighty, grant me mercy. If I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved. I kind of got to that point in a sense. I've done everything I can. I will try to do everything I can. I'm not going to be irresponsible. But at this point, it's God's. I'm trusting Him. I'm going to leave it in His hands. So, go all the way to the right. In fact, if you could go one more step to the right, that's what I saw before. Okay, so all the way to the right, it's 3 whatever the measurement is. If you actually go a step further, 4 is actually more where my prescription is. Okay, or was. So I was struggling to see that top E. In the most recent 1-week checkup, I was able to read the 20/20 line with both eyes. With both eyes. I was able to read the 20/20 line. And I was like, that's so awesome. I couldn't even see the 20/20 line beforehand. I mean, like it's some sort of blur down there somewhere, maybe. But to be able to actually read the 20/20 line. As I've already said here this morning, being able to see so well that I'm thinking to myself at nighttime, and my sister said this happened for me months afterwards, where I'd go to take out my contacts at night because I was seeing like my contacts would normally see. And I think to myself, there were numerous times, even waiting for the procedure with PRK, that I'm thinking to myself, I could walk out right now. I could still walk out. It's not too late. I could still walk. They're prepping you. You're supposed to be there for 2 to 3 hours. Now, thankfully, the whole surgery time was only like 15 minutes start to stop. I went, sat down in the surgery place. Start to stop, it was 15 minutes, both eyes. It's awesome. It's great. And I've said this to different people, I was actually so disappointed at how easy it was. Like, I was actually really disappointed, because I was like, I'd so psyched myself up for this thing. And I'm like, that's it? Like, that's all we're doing? Like, I'll come back like tomorrow and do this again or something? Like, we do this a bunch of times or something? So I was disappointed, because I'd psyched myself up so much. But it's just neat because I feel like it illustrates this truth of oftentimes we try to take control of our life, and when we give God control back, He's able to take our life and do something awesome with it. And I think God is constantly wanting to do something awesome in our life. That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, okay? Don't get this, it's all fuzzy and roses and all, maybe that's trials and tests, maybe that's perfecting Christ's image in you. Patience is one of those things you never pray for, because you're like, I know how to develop patience, and it takes time. I don't want to develop patience, okay? So I realize some of those things are not necessarily fun as you're going through them, but recognize this as God has a place that He wants to take you that is good. Ultimately this control question is God good? Is God good? Yes or no? If He's good, then you can give Him control. But if He's not, you should continue to maintain control of your life. I can tell you where that's going to take you, and Jacob will show you where that eventually gets you. And ultimately the question is, will you give God control?